D.C.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the program. Tonight, we will visit a topic that we have not talked about in a long time. This program actually started when the war on Iraq was brewing. And when the United States went to war against Iraq, we started telling you the truth about the war and about the United States. Many of you did not like us at that time, but as time went on and we were proven to be right on almost everything that we have talked about. Tonight, ladies and gentlemen, we will be visiting a topic that I actually visited back in 2006 and 2005. And that topic is the depleted uranium. As you know, if you haven't heard of this phrase, depleted uranium, it's like nuclear bomb, but at a smaller scale. Depleted uranium is a very dense metal. It's still radiation, it's still radiant, and as you know, nuclear radiation will stay with us for billions of years. And the effect of this depleted uranium is being seen, as we had shown you back in 2006 when I interviewed the project director for the depleted uranium at the Pentagon, Doug Rocky. When I interviewed him back in 2006, we are going to play actually, kind of remind you of that interview that I did back in 2006 with Doug Rocky. But depleted uranium, still there. And as I understand it, and we had interviews with many experts at that time, one of them is Dahir Jamal, who we are going to see in an interview recently done on Democracy Now! And we have interviewed many experts on the subject back then. We're going to bring you depleted uranium again because it will be with the Iraqis for many years to come and many generations to come. Until now, the hospital in Falujah receives many cases, many birth cases weekly with birth defects. As a matter of fact, on weekly basis, you might get 10 to 15 cases in that same hospital of birth defects due to depleted uranium that the United States have used in the war against Iraq. Speaking of the war against Iraq, there is a new book that will be published by the New York Times. It's supposed to be written by a very senior personality in the Bush administration. And in that book, he said what they call secrets of why we want to war against Iraq. This senior, this person who they have not released the name yet, he said, we were looking for someone to kick ass. He said, we were looking to kick somebody's ass. That was after we already went to Afghanistan. He said Afghanistan was not big enough. Now, I don't buy that. Now, I know the war in Iraq, and as you know, the war in Iraq was not done because of 9/11. No. We used what happened on 9/11 to lie to our people here in the United States of why we are going there. We told them that we need to go and kill them on their streets before they come and kill us on our streets. You remember that phrase? Because actually that was a Pentagon phrase. Those of you, the families of those of you who were in the service back then, I know you've heard that phrase, because that's what the Pentagon, that were the orders to come down to you, the families, that we need to go kill them on their streets before they come and kill us on our streets. That was a lie. You know it's a lie. And this high senior official with a high position in the Bush administration supposedly wrote this book, and he's going to tell us a lot of secrets. The main theme of what he's saying is we just needed to kick someone's ass. Now, that's BS. Now, we know that the war in Iraq was done for Israel at the pleasure of Israel, so the dominoes effect of destroying Arab countries starts. And they said back in 1996 in the Clean Break document that the removal of Saddam Hussein from power and the destruction of the Iraqi regime is an Israeli objective in its own right. And they talked about the new Middle East in those documents way before 9/11. And we are seeing now what's called the Arab Spring. Of course, we started from the get-go. Before the Arab Spring, before it even bloomed, we told you this Arab Spring is nothing but disaster to the Middle East. And now all the peoples of the Middle East and all the countries of the Middle East, they understand that. When I started talking about the Arab Spring not being an Arab Spring, but it is the same old plan to destroy the Arab countries and to destroy the Arab people and make them separate, hating each other's and at war with each other's. We told you this, though. You're probably one of the most educated audiences in the world. We told you this years before the Arab Spring, what Israel was going to do. If you have been watching this program for the last 10 years, you know that. So getting back to the depleted uranium. Depleted uranium, it's a product of uranium before we extract the pure uranium or whatever they call it to make nuclear bombs. What is left is nothing but radiation-full metal, very dense, and when you shoot it in a tank shell or whatever, you can shoot it. There are bullets that are depleted uranium. There are RPGs that are depleted uranium. It sliced through a tank like a hot knife sliced through butter. But it's good in battle. In the battlefield, it's perfect. But what happens to the environment? And we have used tons and hundreds of tons of depleted uranium on those Iraqi cities, especially on Falujah. You remember Falujah? And we showed you way back then in 2003 and 2004 the pictures that were coming out of Falujah because of the weapons we were using. And then as the years went on, we started showing you pictures of children who were born deformed. These children are still born deformed in Falujah, in Iraq, and throughout Iraq. Children with one eye, children with deformed. What you are seeing, this is something that we, as the United States of America, have done. We have no moral stand anymore to talk about any terrorists, to talk about that we are the good people and they are the bad people. When something happens here, we think, oh, they're terrorists, they did that. Look, I do not condone what terrorists act. were committed against the United States. But you have to understand what we have done to the world. Why? Everyone knows that Iraq had nothing to do with 9/11. So, were we responsible enough to say and spend the money to take care of those children, to take care of getting rid of this uranium from Falujah? No, we have not. 10 years after, and we have not. We have a couple of videos that we are going to show you recently. And then after we show you those, we're going to come back and show you parts of the interview that I did with Doug Roque, who was the project director of the depleted uranium cleanup project that was what we have used in Iraq against the Iraqi army. He went in there, he was the project director, and the interview between me and Doug Roque is on YouTube. You can see it, and it's also on Google. It's all over the internet that we have done back in 2006. You can see the full interview with him. But let's show a couple of recent clips to bring you up to date to what is happening in the world of depleted uranium in Iraq.
It's all along motorways.
Well, it's very interesting how it's very interesting how you bring in that last point. You're discussing the issues of radiation exposure, possibly behind these birth defects, as you say. We heard reports years ago of during the invasion of Iraq of missiles and bullets tipped with depleted uranium being used in the warfare. Are you telling us here at RT that that's the reason behind the majority of these defects?
Yes,
and that huge numbers?
Absolutely. That's absolutely the cause. In fact, in our paper that we published last year, we measured the levels of uranium in the hair of these mothers, and we were able to look along the strand of hair. You know, as you know, hair grows slowly, and so if you look at the end of the hair, you get a sort of historical view of what's happening, and the uranium was increasing towards the end of the hair. So we believe quite strongly that it was the uranium weapons, the new uranium weapons that were used in Falujah, and of course they used an awful lot of depleted uranium in al-Basra as well. So that's also probably the cause of that.
Well, you discuss this issue of radiation exposure, of missiles or bullets being tipped with depleted uranium being used by British and American forces in Iraq. The U.S. Defense Department has responded to this report by claiming there's no official evidence indicating a connection between military action and birth defects in Iraq. This seems like a bit of a backhanded response to such a severe issue we're talking about here.
Well, of course they would say that, and they would attempt to cover up anything that they've done. But I have to say that it's getting increasingly difficult the more and more papers that are being brought out on this issue. And I reported this whole issue about the uranium in the hair and the congenital malformations at the United Nations Human Rights Council last month. And there was an awful lot of interest in it there. So we would hope that the United Nations might actually put some pressure on the United States now to come clean about the kind of weaponry that they were using. And I'm sure they were using a lot of experimental weaponry in Falujah, which is why we see these enormous increases in congenital malformation. Increases which have never been seen after any war in the past, I have to say, unless really serious agents like Agent Orange were being used. And there's no evidence that anything like that was being used in Iraq.
All right, Professor Christopher Busby from the European Committee on Radiation Risks. Many thanks for coming on RT today.
Thank you.
Okay. And we are going to see in the next clip with Dahir Jamal. Now, I interviewed Dahir Jamal way back in 2006. He actually went to Falujah and got some pictures of burnt children and burnt bodies where the United States have used white phosphorus, which is against international law, but they have used it, and they have used the depleted uranium. And Dahir Jamal had went in there and actually did an excellent documentaries, and he has been going back and forth there. So let's hear the Democracy Now! Interview with Dahir Jamal recently.
The most recent statistic I'll end with before I get into Falujah and what these images are showing is that in 2005 we saw 1,600 Iraqis with cancer out of 100,000, so a massive escalation that continues. And going on to Falujah, because I wrote about this a year ago and then I returned to the city again this trip, we are seeing an absolute crisis of congenital malformations of newborn. There is one doctor, a pediatrician named Dr. Samira Alani, working on this crisis in the city. She's the only person there registering cases, and she's seeing horrific birth defects. I mean, these are extremely hard to look at. They're extremely hard to bear witness to, but it's something that we all need to pay attention to because of the amount of depleted uranium used by the U.S. military during both of their brutal attacks on the city of 2004, as well as other toxic munitions like white phosphorus, among other things. And so what this has generated is from 2004 up to this day, we are seeing a rate of congenital malformations in the city of Falujah that is surpassed even that in the aftermath of, in the wake of the Japanese cities of Hiroshima and Nagasaki that were, that nuclear bombs were dropped on at the end of World War II. So Dr. Samir Alani actually visited with doctors in Japan, comparing statistics, and found that the amount of congenital malformations in Falujah is 14 times greater than the same rate measured in the cities of Hiroshima and Nagasaki in Japan in the aftermath of the nuclear bombings. These types of birth defects, she said, there are types of congenital malformations that she said they don't even have medical terms for, that some of the things they're seeing they've never seen before. They're not in any of the books or any of the scientific literature that they have access to. She said it's common now in Falujah for newborns to come out with massive multiple systemic defects, immune problems, massive central nervous system problems, massive heart problems, skeletal disorders, babies being born with two heads, babies being born with half of their internal organs outside of their bodies, cyclops babies literally with one eye, really horrific, nightmarish types of birth defects, and it is ongoing. And she, lastly, to really give you an idea of the scope of the problem, is that this is happening now at a massive rate, and she said her being the only person cataloging and registering cases with no help from Baghdad, who is denying that there's some sort of problem like this in Falujah. She said that she could probably safely estimate that the number of cases, as high as the rate that she's seeing, could probably be doubled because so many people are having their babies at home and just taking care of it. You know, most of these babies are being born dead, and then they're not reporting it whatsoever. So this is an ongoing crisis, and the rate has not increased since last year, but it's not decreased either. It was still, when I talked to her last year, it was 14 times a greater rate of malformations in newborns as compared to the aftermath areas of the nuclear bombings in Japan, and it's the same when I spoke with her about this 1 week ago.
Jamal, do you know, has any U.S. government official ever publicly acknowledged that the U.S. used depleted uranium in Iraq? And what does international law say about the use of depleted uranium in wartime?
The Pentagon has admitted to using several hundred tons during the '91 Gulf War. It's hard to get official figures from them from this current, the most recent war, where certainly they've admitted that it was used, but figures range anywhere from another couple of hundred tons upwards to 800 tons. There's been no official statement that I've seen anyway from the Pentagon talking about the effects of these weapons either on the Iraqi civilian population or members of the U.S. military who use them, like the person in the clip that you played earlier. International law is very clear about these types of weapons. Any weapon that is known to have a lasting negative impact on the civilian population in the general area where it is used is technically a banned or a highly restricted weapon. And in this case, these types of weapons should not be allowed to be used. As I reported back in 2004 when it came out that white phosphorus was indeed being used in Falujah, that's another restricted weapon where the Geneva Conventions state very clearly that if there are any possibility of any civilians in the area where it is going to be used, it is is not allowed to be used. So the Geneva Conventions are very, very clear about these. And this brings up a broader point about the war, as we heard in an earlier clip from Michael Moore talking about the illegality of the war. It's good to hear this brought back into the discourse. Another individual, Robert Jensen, wrote an extremely poignant piece about the illegality of the war.
Okay. You know, we as a country, we caused that. We caused that. I don't know what to say. Every time I talk about Iraq and about how the people in the United States were conned to go to war against a country that did not do them any harm, did not attack it. Iraq did not attack the United States. It did not do nothing. And we still look at George Bush as being a good president. The murderer, the one who conned. Now, of course, he was not the one who conned the United States. I mean, the people in the United States. He was nothing but a hired hand for the people above him who were planning all this. Don't feel special, because the Arab people are in the same boat. There are powers beyond and above the governments that you see in front of you, and these powers are playing the people of the earth. These powers control money. These powers control the economy. These powers control the politicians on this earth. That's how bad this world is. So let's not feel special that you did not know, because you know what? If you were following us from the beginning, you knew it was a lie from the beginning. When the rest of the country were celebrating the troops going back and forth, and they still do. They still do. But in a democracy like ours, the people should have spoke. The people should have spoken against this war, but they did not. So the responsibility of those pictures that you are seeing, it falls on the shoulders of the people of the United States. Not just the government. Because there's nothing worse for a country as an ignorant citizen. Nothing worse. An educated, knowledgeable citizen is a big asset for the country. Now, you've seen what we have done in Iraq as a country, as America, as the United States of America. The civilized, the pretty, the nice. You see how ugly. Now, they knew what weapons they were using, and they knew what was going to happen, but it doesn't matter. Because this war was for Israel to start the dominoes of what you are seeing, of what happened in the other Arab countries, of what happened in Libya, and what is happening in Syria, what is happening in Egypt, in Yemen, in Sudan, in Lebanon, everywhere. We are nothing but pawns in their hands. We're nothing but pawns in their hands. Now, we do have a couple of short clips. Now, this here, it's back in 2006 when I was much younger, and you are going to actually, and also the technology actually at that time, what we had in the studio, I want to say it was primitive technology, but you know what? It was working, and we were able to put out some good programs out of the old technology. But we're not going to talk about technology now. What you're going to see now is an interview that I did back in 2006 with Doug Rocky, who was the project director for the Pentagon, the cleaning job after Iraq war back in 1991 when we invaded, well, not invaded, when we went and destroyed the Iraqi army back then for invading Kuwait. They sent Doug Rocky, he was the project director for the cleaning job for depleted uranium. And then when he saw what happened then, and he got sick himself, and he saw that many of his troops actually got sick, and he started speaking against the United States military that used that back in 1991. Imagine 11 years later or 12 years later, we used the weapons that he said don't use it. It's horrible. But we used it in Iraq, in Fallujah. Let's go to my interview with Doug Rocky back in 2006. Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. We are speaking with Doug Rocky. Doug, is this, I mean, you know, we went after Saddam Hussein for having a weapon of mass destruction.
Which he didn't have.
Which he did not have, but we did. And we used it.
Correct.
I mean, well, we are supposed to be the head of the civilized world, and yet we go to a country that did not do us anything, and we use depleted uranium, which is basically a weapon of mass destruction, and their babies are going to be born deformed for probably thousands of years to come. Is this against international law? I mean, is there anyone who's going to say, look, United States, you did wrong? I mean, is anyone working on this deal to make it right? Can we ever make it right?
Well, the United Nations Subcommission on Human Rights, through the work of an incredible lawyer by the name of Karen Parker, who's from California, and then worked with the, you know, on this issue. Yeah, they passed it years and years ago that uranium munitions were illegal. But again, it's just common sense. You have to understand, uranium munitions are solid radioactive, chemically toxic materials. You could not even legally dispose of 1 pound of uranium, depleted uranium or uranium munitions at any place or any location within the United States or other civilized nations. That the United States has taken thousands upon thousands of tons and dispersed it throughout all over the world, and including in the United States, and literally refused to clean up the contamination that they're required to do by their own orders and regulations, and they refuse to provide the medical care that they are required to do by their own orders and regulations. The toxicity of uranium munitions is given. I mean, prior to Gulf War II, Colonel Edgar J. Wakayama briefed all the senior leadership of the Pentagon on uranium munitions. And I'm reading this briefing right now. It's very clear, quote, the alpha particle taken inside the body in large doses is hazardous, producing cell damage and cancer. Lung cancer is well documented. It's exactly what we've seen. The beta particle is hazardous to the skin and the lens of the eye. That's where we had all of the rashes and the eye damage. And I had surgery earlier this year for specific all the eye damage. They finally fixed it after many, many years of problems. Colonel Wakayama went on, continued to brief the senior leadership, and this includes Secretary Rumsfeld and all the generals. That is, DU is chemically toxic. It's like eating lead. Target organ is a kidney in the bone. What it does is there's decalcification. So you not only have decalcification of the bone like osteopenia and osteoporosis, but then obviously your teeth are all decalcified and they just fall out and break off, which has happened to us. Urine samples containing uranium are mutagenic as determined by the Ames test. The cultured human stem bone cell line with DU has also transformed the cells carcinogenic. There's all the leukemias. And then in addition, we have all of the other chemical toxicity effects the neurological system and everything else. It just goes on and on. The primary routes of exposure, again, inhalation, ingestion, absorption. the one thing that they told the leadership at the Pentagon they were very concerned with, and this is, quote, ingestion. And this is from children playing and eating contaminated soil and contaminated drinking water and food in the community.
So, have you been speaking overseas? Like, are you doing any traveling?
Well, ever since I was the director of Depleted Uranium Project back in the 90s, and I did all the briefings within the Pentagon and within the military, once I found out and realized in 1997 that they were not going to comply with their own requirements and they were not going to provide medical care to anybody, then I started speaking out all over the country and all over the world. So yes, I have.
So, okay. Well, the other clip, actually, it's much shorter than that, but it's extremely important that we hear him. And then we will come back to continue with the program. Doug, I want to know, what about, I mean, the people that are making these weapons, are they in any way responsible for this mess that we are in?
Well, obviously, yes. But again, they're made and manufactured by the U.S. military. They're Department of Defense contractors. As far back as 1981, Aerojet that manufactures uranium munitions in Tennessee, they were seeing all the adverse health and environmental effects, all the serious adverse health problems in the employees of the plant at Aerojet. And 60 Minutes did a major story on it back in 1981 called On Strike for Their Lives, and we've continued ever since. We have a community called Concord, Massachusetts, and you probably have learned your American history, but Concord, Massachusetts is where our nation was born on the 18th of April in 1775. Paul Revere and the Minutemen, the British. And that community is totally trashed because of the manufacturing and testing of uranium munitions. Horrible health effects in that community. And today it's a Superfund site where they're trying to get it cleaned up, but again, virtually you can't clean it up. So you have the problems all over. Again, it's very, very simple. When you deliberately take thousands of tons of radioactive toxic materials, disperse it in the environment, knowing perfectly well that it contaminates air, water, and soil, that there virtually is no way to clean it up, and then you refuse to provide prompt and effective medical care, even though it's very limited in its effectiveness, you've created a problem. And it's wrong. It's simply wrong.
Do you know if anyone is suing these manufacturers or the Department of Defense?
You can't sue. That's what I was just explaining. With the Ferris Doctrine, you cannot sue. They are beyond the law. They are above all laws. The only thing we can do, and this is the reason why I wrote the regulations and the orders and the procedures to clean it up and mandate ensure medical care was provided, is that all you can do is basically go and ask them like a child asking a father, take care of me, please. And they have the choice to do it or not. I mean, you have to understand, today, over 500,000 of our sons and daughters are affected from Gulf War illness and all the effects of combat in the last few years. That's from Gulf War I and Gulf War II alone. We have hundreds of thousands affected from Agent Orange in the Vietnam era. Again, I got zapped by that originally. And the Department of Defense, the Department of Veteran Affairs has virtually walked away.
And you said that our soldiers cannot sue.
That's correct. They cannot sue anybody.
Now, what about now?
That was a brand new recent court decision with a federal court in New York because the members of the 442nd U.S. Army National Guard unit from New York military police unit got all exposed and affected and are sick, children born with birth defects and the spouses affected. And so they tried to get medical care first in according with the orders and regulations, and they were denied. So then they went to federal court. And the decision was that fair is applicable, and they can't sue. Now, the judge did rule that the improper, ineffective medical care provided by the U.S. Department of Veteran Affairs physicians once they were discharged from the military, that they can sue on that grounds for negligence. Now, the military has never denied that their own negligence. They just have absolved themselves of responsibility and all liability for their negligence. That's what Paris does.
What about people in other countries? Do you know if any people in other countries are suing?
How do you sue?
I don't know. Go through the international court?
Well, I mean, we've had international court hearings and all that stuff in The Hague and all over the place, and they've ruled that this is illegal and that the individual will be held liable, but so what?
Yeah, who's going to enforce the decision?
Yeah, I mean, you know, when the President of the United States doesn't enforce our own laws and does all kinds of things illegal and found, you know, in violation of, you know, human rights by the U.S. Supreme Court, and nothing happens.
You know, our liability, do we even have enough money in the country to cover our liability from this big mess that we're in?
You couldn't even clean up the highway of death, which happened outside of Basra in Iraq from Gulf War I alone. It's virtually impossible. And see, this is the reason. Once we put all the reports together, we did all the analysis, we did all the research, we verified what needed to be done, we developed the procedures, and then we realized from firsthand experience that it can't be done. That's where I, as a senior Army officer, the director of the Depleted Uranium Project for the U.S. Army, told them they could no longer use it in combat.
All right. That was Doug Roque. He was the project director for the cleanup, the Pentagon cleanup project director after the Iraq-Kuwait incident. That was back in 1991-92. Well, we are not a pretty country like most of us would like to believe. It's rotten from within. And we think we are civilized. We think because we have a nice system of government, we have a pretty nice style of living, because we practically print our own money, and no one is keeping us from not printing money out of nothing, out of thin air. But yet, we think we are nice people, we're the best on the earth. Well, we're not. We're just a bully with a lot of guns and a lot of firepower. We're doing it because we can and we could. And just like Bill Clinton, when he was asked, why did you do what you did with Monica Lewinsky? His answer was, because I could. And most of you do remember that. So we have the mentality, the American mentality, that we do it because we could. And that's exactly, but that's not why we did this thing in Iraq. We did this thing in Iraq because Israel wanted us to destroy the Arab armies around it. And as you know, the Arab army of Iraq was like the fourth largest army in the world. They had about a 1 million man army, very highly technological. You had like 5,000 Iraqi nuclear scientists when we invaded Iraq. And so Iraq was a very highly technological country where people were living in peace and stability. And now Iraq is a war-torn country. Still, even after, it's like we say, well, the people, they're fighting by themselves. We left Iraq while they're still fighting. Well, guess what? Yeah, we are the cause of what is going on in Iraq now, because we went and destroyed that country, destroyed the army that was keeping that country strong, destroyed the regime that was keeping the country together, and now Iraq is on the verge of splitting up into 4 different fighting war areas. sectarian hate. At the time when we invaded, Shiites were marrying Sunnis, and Sunnis were marrying Shiites, and Kurds were marrying Arabs, and Arabs were marrying Kurds. And now these people hate each other, because that's exactly what was in the plan that Israel devised back in 1982 and said, that's how we are going to control these, how we are going to conquer these people. That's how we are going to destroy these people. Exactly what the United States went and done. Now, why would the United States do that for Israel? Because Israel is who controls the United States foreign policy. Israel is who controls our politics. Israel wanted to destroy Iraq. What do you think how we are going to destroy Iraq? By taking them some flowers and some candy? No. By killing them like we did. By destroying the country like we did, using depleted uranium. That's what we have done. Don't talk to me about terrorists. Don't talk to me about Islamic terrorists. No. We created those two so we can continue with the program that Israel has devised. Where is the Libyan army? Billions of dollars were spent on the Libyan army. Where is it now? A bunch of gangs fighting on the streets of Tripoli? That's what Libya is? That's what the Arab Spring is? And we even went in there and killed Gaddafi for them, because we said we want to spread democracy there. It was a big lie. You know, Anderson Cooper will get on CNN every night and all the lies, the poison that infected your brains with, and you were okay. You know, these leaders who have been over these countries with, like, you know, okay, 40 years, 42 years, but his people were okay with it. It was a stable country. Of course, not everyone in the country was actually with Gaddafi, but Gaddafi had done a lot for his country. Saddam Hussein has done a lot for his country. And now, Egypt. What is going on in Egypt? Who caused that? We did. Because we spent millions of dollars to get the Egyptians hating each other. We spent billions of dollars. Now, who wants that? AIPAC, the American Israel Public Affairs Committee that is controlled by the Likud government of Israel. It has been all along. AIPAC is the same organization that JFK tried to actually end their influence in this country when it was called the American Zionist Council. He tried, him and his brother. They tried to eliminate the influence of the Israel lobby. You know, when I call it the Jewish influence, people say, no, don't say the Jewish influence, say the Zionist influence. Well, you're not going to understand if we say the Zionist influence. It is the Jewish lobby in the United States. Very powerful lobby. Owns practically everyone in Congress, maybe one or two that are not owned by it. But controls the rest of them. Controls what goes on. We have interviewed on this program many U.S. congressmen and senators. And the interviews are all over the internet, and they told you who the Israel lobby is, who the Jewish lobby is. They told you how well it's organized and funded. As a politician, you do need money. You do need the media. They control the media. If you don't play by the ball, by their rules, you're gone. That's how they control it. And that's how they control you, because they control the media. Just think about what they were doing before the United States went and attacked Iraq. Think about what they were doing. Scaring the hell out of you with We need to go and kill them. Weapons of mass destruction. Saddam Hussein killed his own people. It was nothing but lies, lies, lies. He killed his own people when he was at war with Iran. And the United States is the one who advised him to use chemical weapons and gave him chemical weapons. When the Iranians put up a 1 million army and 1 million men were going actually against the Iraqi soldiers, that's when the United States said, hey, look, we have a solution for you. Now, at the time when Iraq did use those chemical weapons, the United Nations condemned Iraq, and it was going to take some sanctions against Iraq. Who stood up and protected Iraq and vetoed the resolutions against Iraq? It was the United States. The same United States that used that to go and attack Iraq. Oh, we need to go. He killed his own people with chemical weapons. We've got to go and get rid of him before he comes and kill us on our own streets. That was at a time when Iraq actually lost 500,000 children, not at war, but during the 12-year siege that the United States put Iraq under after the Gulf War. Those children died due to lack of nutrition and malnutrition and lack of medicine. And when Albright was asked about that, at the time she was the Secretary of State, when they asked her, hey, 500,000 Iraqi children died, her answer was, that was collateral damage. As if the objective is to go and take a regime out, but it doesn't matter what happens in the meantime to the people, to the innocent civilians that are protected under the same laws that we always say the international community. Well, the international community says it's against international community standards and against the Geneva Convention to use, the 5th Geneva Convention, to use white phosphorus. We used it in Iraq. Israel used it in Gaza. Depleted uranium, the same thing. Israel used it. The United States used it. So we're telling people there are international laws you cannot do, but then when we do it, when Israel does it, no one there to say, who's going to punish the United States? Who? Who's going, what do you do? What do you do? Nothing. So the human mentality, so don't blame people when they take actions. The human mentality is, it doesn't matter, forget about this BS called civilizations. That's BS. Feed that to the rats. There's no civilizations. There's no civilized world. No. Underneath, it's nothing but garbage. Civilized world does not do this. Civilized world is not controlled by thugs, by Zionist thugs that control 300 million Americans to use them to fight these wars. Who's doing anything to that? No, nobody. The media? The media is not going to do anything because the media is part of the whole formula. The media is the #1 enemy of the so-called civilized world because the media keeps the truth away from you. With the Sean Hannitys and the Rush Limbaughs and the Bill O'Reillys and this judge on Fox, Judge Jeanine. I mean, who put that thing on? I have no idea. But she's got to go. But many of you probably like the garbage that she puts out. Or Michelle Milkins, or especially, what's her name? Coder. Anyway, that's beyond the scope of tonight's program. In summary, and to end this program with, there's no such a thing as terrorists and good people. People, if they can do something, they're going to do it under any name, individually or collectively. And what we have, the misery that the United States have caused to the people of Iraq and still caused to the people of the Middle East, we are responsible collectively for that misery. Are you a victim? Well, maybe you look at it and say, what can I do? I'm only one. So you want to play the victim. So you've been victimized as a United States citizen, that the government lied to you and that the media lied to you. But you see, we can't, the government is all we got. Because at the end, we have to feel safe. And the only way, what are we going to do? Criticize our government and think that our government is a traitor to the country? No way. Who's going to think that? That the United States would destroy the reputation of the United States and the American people and what they fought for, or fought for. Freedom? Democracy? That's not what democracy and freedom, that to me is captivity. Because if we are doing what others want us to do against our own principles, but at the time, because we're stupid enough not seeing that it is against our own principles, we go and do it. Now, do we see a responsibility from the media to go back and say, wait a minute, we don't buy this BS that George Bush did not know that our intelligence services made a mistake, as George Bush said at the time that, when they found out that, hey, there's no weapons of mass destruction with Iraq. You know what he said? He said, that's the intelligence I had. Of course he was lying. And we told you that on this station, when he said it, the day he said it, we told you, I still remember it. I still remember it. When he said, they asked him about it. It's like, hey, look, you went and killed all these people. 1 million Iraqis died. There's no weapons of mass destruction. Oh, well, that's the intelligence that I received. No, it's a lie. We knew it's a lie. And our intelligence budget is $2. George Bush's intelligence budget was $10 billion. And we knew it, and he didn't. But then after he got out, he goes on to write a book saying that, yeah, he would have done it again. And everybody in the country is applauding. He took a tour, sold millions of books, I guess, made money for being a traitor to the country. Only in America. Only in America. And I'm sure after he's dead, we're probably going to have probably a statue or a memorial, and we're probably building his own library, or maybe it's built, maybe it's his dad, I don't know. I don't know if we do that while they're still living, or if we do that after they're dead. But no one's taking responsibility for this. No one. The majority of the country still thinks that what we did in Iraq was pretty good. We have removed Saddam Hussein. That's it. We sent the country back into the Stone Ages with millions of people displaced, wounded, dead. And look at what we have done to our economy and to the thousands of people, American people. For what? Give me one benefit, just one benefit. I don't need 10. We spend trillions of dollars that we don't even have. We borrowed trillions of dollars. That's why we have huge deficit now, 16 trillion, because of the war. And who's to be responsible? No one. We're still applauding George Bush. We're still applauding all these people. They're still roaming the skies of America on all the channels, Rumsfeld, Cheney. They're still regurgitating the same lies, and we still look up to them. Well, we are not such a nice country as we like to be. Face it. Face it. What we have done to Iraq and the Iraqis is horrible. And they're going to be with that mess of depleted uranium for the rest of their lives, many years to come. That's all we have for you. Good night. Go do the right thing.